Welcome back once again to Two Guys
And a Stack of Comics.
and a Stack of Comics.
That's Mike. I'm Reed. This is part 4, the final part of our ranking of the MCU movies. We got the top 8, the last ones. Again,
This
took
is
a
it.
lot of time to kind of get through these. Based completely on our own opinions, based completely on, just enjoyability of the movie. Kind of if you were sitting at home watching TV, both these movies start at the same time. Which one are you turning on? So nothing with box office, critical ratings, anything like that.
No
Just-
Rotten Tomatoes here.
Yep, just completely based on how did you enjoy it, what kind of movie, did you have fun with the movie, and like its rewatchability factor, all of that. Just kind of where does these land? So we're at the top 8. These ones, in all honesty, we could probably have gone over 4 hours on each one as to why it should be slotted higher or lower.
And it's likely that you will have one of these as your top, and we put it somewhere else.
Yep.
But that's okay. When we get down to this close, and even in part 3, these movies, they're all so good. They are all had their magic moments. They were all awesome. Not a bad movie in the bunch.
No, and it
From
really showed.
16 on down.
It really just showed the strength the MCU used to have as far as its movies.
I mean,
were
they just brought
producing
it.
hit after hit after hit, and it's just really impressive. And when we get to these, we'll try to go as much as we can to explain how we ended up getting these so close and what we appreciate about them. But some really tough choices for anybody kind of down here. So 8 to start.
Coming in at number 8.
Avengers Infinity War would be 8 for us on it.
I know, and when this movie came out, the hype was so big. Everywhere you went, there were Infinity Gauntlets.
everyone was hyped for it.
Everyone
man.
was talking
Everybody
about the
was.
Infinity Stones. People had no idea what the stones were. All of a sudden they knew every color and everything about it.
Yep.
The hype was way, way high. It was probably the pinnacle of comic book movies at its time. It was amazing.
No, this was the big event. This was the main event had finally arrived, kind of thing. All the build up, all the development, all the character arcs, all of this was going to collide into these 2 parts that they had of Endgame and Infinity War, and this was the kickoff.
And at that point, you didn't know if this was what we now know is going to be Endgame. You didn't know how it was going to end.
Yeah.
This story arc could have taken us all the way to Endgame. When you first sat down in the theater, you didn't know.
You didn't know who was going to make it out of the movie. You kind of knew like a lot of the actors like Downey and Chris Evans might be leaving. So, when you saw things, there was some legit tension in the film of like, okay, is Thanos going to take out Iron Man? It's like, is that going to happen?
Yeah.
Where I will always like this movie, I think the ending of the movie is one of the most surprising for a comic book movie ever, and that to actually have the guts to let the bad guy win.
Yeah.
At the end of the film. And
I think it
will
shocked everybody.
Yeah. I think most folks knew like the snap might happen, but you just kind of figured it's Marvel, it's Disney, the Avengers always win. Like, they're not going to really leave it where this guy wins.
It took a lot of guts.
And it was I remember seeing people, just kind of shook in the theaters like, man, what just happened?
Absolutely. What just happened? Yeah.
And it was just well earned for all of it. I think
it really left you
worked.
waiting for the next one. Like, oh my gosh, if this movie ends this way, what's gonna, when's the next one coming out? What's going on?
Yeah, and then you had Thanos show up for the first time ever, and like you didn't know if he would really work as a character. Not only did he work, he ends up being like incredibly iconic and just being someone who was like a worthy foe for all of these opponents. And it was just so cool to see all the characters interact. Like, you finally get the Guardians mixed with the Avengers, mixed with Spider-Man and Doctor Strange, and it just felt like you were watching a big time event happen.
In 10, 15 years earlier, it would have been impossible. Sony would have never let Spider-Man show up in another movie. It
showed the strength of Marvel, because at the same time, you had DC, and they couldn't put Batman and Superman in the same movie. It's like DC's trying to rub 2 sticks together.
Yeah.
And Marvel's, doing these full-fledged kind of.
There were some backroom deals that made that movie happen, and in the boardroom or whatever. And look, you can't go wrong. We got to do this, and they did. Yeah. So kudos to him.
And I think the best scene of this film for me that was when Thor arrives down in Wakanda at the end of the film, the Stormbreaker.
That was just awesome.
It was just so cool to see, and I think they did so many great character moments. The humor was on point, and I always love the way the director kind of teamed up the film, where you have Thor kind of with a portion of the Guardians, and then you've got some of the Guardians with Spider-Man and Iron Man and Doctor Strange. They just really figured out a way to make all of the dynamics work and to give every character a great moment. And I love, too, the moral conundrum of some of the things where you've got stuff like, they could just take the Soul Stone out of Vision's head and end it, but Captain America won't let him die.
No.
Not without a fight. And there were so many cool things that they'd done where it was like, man, the character work that went into this and then seeing it pay off and then it kind of bite them in the butt where they lose because of some of it. It was really just peak storytelling of just making all your ducks kind of come in a row. And so great movie. That's why it's up at number 8. We could probably talk about it forever, but yeah, number 8 would be Infinity War.
Number 7.
7, we have the original Thor movie, which I don't think is actually. It's certainly the best of the Thor films in my opinion, and I think
it really is.
It was one of those early MCU movies where you just knew that they had figured it out when you watched it. You could tell Kenneth Branagh, who directed the film, really got it. He brought that like Shakespearean sense to Thor, which was so cool because when you read
harkened back to the original, language that Stan Lee kind of wrote for Thor, and it's kind of quaint. It may be kind of derided, and I've heard it derided from critics,
but it makes Thor unique. And I think that was what was so cool about this is you understood like, wow, they're actually hiring people who get what these comics do.
It started to come together.
That collision of worlds of like you have this very old Shakespearean sounding Viking, and he's going to enter this world of Captain
Makes no
America
sense, but
and
yet
Iron
it works
Man
somehow.
And that's kind of the cool part of Marvel, and I think DC when it's done right is like you can mix these worlds and it works, and this movie just did that really well. You also get the debut of Loki in this movie.
It was a very dramatic entrance, too.
Probably the best cast villain they've had thus far. He's still kicking around now, and you wouldn't have thought, when most comic book movies kill off their villain in their first film and they never come back, the fact that Loki 15 years later is still leading a TV series shows how well cast he was and how well written he was.
Absolutely.
And I really love that they leaned into the family dynamic of Thor, being flawed and being kicked out by his dad, and then you've got this brother conflict. It really was so.
He can't help himself. He has to. He always gives his brother another chance, and no, don't fall for it, Thor. Don't do it. But he does.
It does, and it's great, and just a cool end conflict, and just the overall presentation of Asgard as a world to be in. I think it was just a great movie, a ton of enjoyment. And one of the reasons we have some of these higher is there's a complete character arc for the story. I think some of the event films, they're really, really good, but the individual characters don't get a lot of spotlight. This was just a great character journey for Thor.
For a comic book fan, the story is everything. Mm-hmm. And yeah, if it tells a good story, it's gonna have that. It's gonna make you have the urge to hit the clicker, like what we do when we decide one or the other. If they're both coming on at the same time, which one are you gonna pick? Are you gonna pick, Thor
or an Avengers movie?
Infinity War?
You could probably argue one over the other, but yeah, I think just the complete kind of character arc that you get in this movie is really, really hard to top for any kind of team movie that doesn't get that individual focus.
So now we're down to the nitty gritty.
Top 6 now, and again, we start getting into where like this is just.
And I'm looking at the next one over there, and I'm like, is it really at number 6? Because dang, it's so good. But that's just how these movies are. They're all so good.
Yep.
Coming up at number 6, we have Black Panther.
The original Black Panther movie, one of the best Marvel movies that's been made.
Like we were saying earlier, the story, the character, those strengths, and then you're going to say like, well, what did you pick above Black Panther?
Yeah.
It was really, really tough.
No, Black Panther is such a good movie because of, again, it's the character focus on in this movie. Like it truly is just a cool journey for T'Challa as a character. And I think the coolest thing that this did is this is when you knew Marvel kind of had the formula figured out, because even characters that like you probably never saw a Black Panther action figure on the shelves as a kid, and they had figured out like how to make some of these characters that comic book fans had always appreciated marketable to mass audiences, to where now
I mean,
Panther
that's
stuff's
like
everywhere.
the golden ticket of marketing and understanding that, yeah, like maybe it was only the handful of comic book nerds who really enjoyed the character in the 70s and the 60s, but hey, you know, you could bring those out now and they could have mass appeal.
Yep.
And I think that's when they really figured out they
kind of had that magic formula. It
They
just
really
worked.
did.
And they had a great villain in the movie with Killmonger. There's a legit argument to be made of like what he's wanting to do and how he challenges the character both physically and morally. There's just so much good character work done in the movie, and then some of the action sequences that are just delivered. There's that amazing car chase scene at the beginning where it really kind of showed the potential of
the
Black Panther's
costumes,
suit.
the sets.
The suit was fantastic.
And then he took it back to Oakland. Oh my God, that was great.
Yeah, they just did so much well in the movie, and again, it always comes down to like character journey, and this movie very much invested in that. That was really, really cool to see the way they integrated that. So tough to put that at number 6, but it would be there. 5 on the list, we get the top 5. We had Spider-Man: Homecoming, which for me, I might have had higher, but it's close. For me, I will always like this one because my favorite Marvel character outside of Daredevil is probably Spider-Man. I think I've been picking up Spider-Man comics basically since I could afford to go to the comic book shop and buy comics. And this was the first time we actually saw Peter Parker really portrayed as a kid accurately as he shows up. Tobey Maguire was technically in high school, but he looks like he's 30. Andrew Garfield was technically in high school, but he looks like he's 30. This was the first time you saw a movie and like this felt like a kid. And it so perfectly captured that spirit of Spider-Man because of that.
I like the way they kind of went back to basics with the movie. And like you said, he's just a kid. And that's the part of that character that makes it so endearing and so likable, watchable, readable, is that he is just a kid.
He's a teenager trying to figure out his life at the same
Yeah.
time being a superhero. And I think almost anybody who was a kid, which is all of us, can figure out some part of that you attach to.
Absolutely.
Like, he's equally fighting to get a date at school as he is the villain in this movie. And I think anybody who went to high school probably has had that happen.
Yeah, of course.
It'd be also hard to watch and mention this movie without mentioning the Vulture, who Michael Keaton just played the heck out of in this movie. Taking a character who's kind of one-dimensional in the comics a little bit and adding some depth to it really made him, work and challenge Peter in a different way. And I thought that was really cool.
And then they put in the Stanley twist that the villain he has to work with is also the father.
The father of the girlfriend.
Yeah. I mean, that's typical like Stanley, and then they brought that to the modern day and onto the big screen.
And it was really cool to see them find a surprise that like you wouldn't know, but it so perfectly fits Spider-Man just because of that like Parker luck in the comics, where like it's always like his best friend's father's a bad guy, or this guy teacher's a bad. Like I think every professor at Spider-Man's college ends up being a villain.
Has a soft spot for Aunt May.
Yeah,
oh my god,
it was just a well executed twist on that. And I think given what they had as far as they'd already seen 5 other Spider-Man movies made, that they were able to differentiate it while still capitalizing on the strengths of the character. It was just so cool to see that finally
tough hand to play.
And credit to Tom Holland. I mean, what a great job he did playing Peter Parker, especially after how great Maguire was. And while Garfield's movies may not be the best, he was fantastic.
True Spider-Man fans, they really love, they love Tobey and they love Garfield.
So then you get this new kid, and he had all the pressure.
How's he going to
him,
shake out? And he did great.
He did great, and captured, I think, maybe the best like true sense of the character being that young, that youth. It's one of the reasons Spider-Man's so cool in the MCU is like it's a chance if they keep Tom Holland around that you could actually see the journey that you see in the comics, where it's like high school kid to accomplished hero to like a married guy and stuff like that they've done. I think it would be really great to see that, but this was where it kind of all started, and it was just great to see.
So in these next couple, keep in mind the formula.
Yep.
It's Sunday afternoon.
Which one are you
watching?
watching?
Got nothing to do. Both of these movies come on at the same time. Which one are you going to watch? And so you got Homecoming, right? Spider-Man
That's
Homecoming.
4.
Remember?
5. 4. I think 1 through 4 we debated and had different ways every time.
So tough. Like on every one of these, it's like, oh my gosh.
So 4 we had Captain America: The Winter Soldier.
The Winter Soldier.
Again, one of those movies that I think perfectly captured a struggle of a character. Like, how would you challenge Steve Rogers in a way where you could make it believable that he might go a little rogue or kind of, go against things, and throwing Bucky in as the villain? Again, it's a twist that comic book fans knew was coming, but again, it was executed
done so well
that
and
you didn't mind seeing it. And
you're like, how was he going to take out this guy? You just didn't even know. He was like so powerful.
Well, and the greatest movies are those movies where, yes, there's a physical conflict, but you also put the hero in a position where he's challenged morally. And so you have Steve this entire fight. There's not really a doubt that Steve's going to beat the Winter Soldier at the end of the movie, but how does he do that while trying to redeem his friend? It's a perfect challenge for a character who's morals driven like Steve Rogers. You also get, and I think it's a forgotten part of this, like S.H.I.E.L.D. falls apart in this movie. S.H.I.E.L.D. is Hydra.
Oh, yeah.
And it tears it apart, and you get a lot with Nick Fury and Black Widow, and it really established that dynamic between Cap and Black Widow,
and
them
Nick
working
Fury
together.
Yeah.
That relationship carried on. You also get the debut of Falcon in this movie, and he was perfectly integrated into it, and it just had so many cool moments.
As a kid growing up in the 70s, Captain America had it was called Captain America and the Falcon.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of my favorite comics to pick up. The dynamic between those two characters and how they worked together was just awesome. I was so excited to see the Falcon in this movie. It was just
live
amazing.
action, finally.
It was so great.
Well, I love that they kept the humor of like Steve having to adjust to the modern world, where like people are giving him lists of like watch this or watch that, because he's got like 80 years of stuff to catch up on.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where you could just tell Marvel knew what they were doing. This was stuff that, like, if someone did wake up from the 40s, like, what would be there? One of my favorite moments in the movie too, it's a smaller moment, is when he's reunited with Peggy and she's older.
Oh, and that was, it was heartbreaking.
It's kind of one of those
classic.
heartbreaking things, but it really caught that man out of time element that's there for Captain America. Of like, man, you wake up and everything that you
70
had
years
is kind
has
of
gone by.
Gone.
Yeah.
It was just so well directed. I think that's why these directors, the Russos, did this movie. That's why they stuck around for Civil War and the Avengers movies afterwards, and just perfectly earned. And then the action in this movie, the hand-to-hand combat with Cap and the Winter Soldier, is just so cool.
It was just
It's
amazing.
a great movie. Even talking about it right now, I'm like, I can't believe we have it at 4.
I want to go watch it. I do.
We'd have it there.
But then there's number 3, and I might
3.
go home and watch this one.
And crazy enough, Captain America, the Winter Soldier is not even a top Captain America movie. At 3, we have Captain America, the First Adventure. Which,
God, I love this movie.
I originally created the list. I probably would have had this at 1 until I rewatched the movies, and then I slightly moved it to 3. I know Mike was kind of in the same boat.
I was like, man, the way they did, I'm a big fan of the old comics.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how Jack Kirby drew Captain America in the 1940s. And I loved how when he got brought back in the 60s, how he still had that connection to the 40s. And it was just an amazing experience for me to see him, in that era, and brought to modern times. It was just, I loved it.
Yeah, and it was really cool to just see a superhero movie based in World War II. Again, it's one of those things that differentiated it from anything else. We hadn't really seen that. I love when he first gets like the comics accurate costume, and it's part of the show, and they have him, punching Hitler like on the cover, and it's the actor.
And that was really that really happened in the 40s. They had Captain America stumping from war bonds. They put some guy in a little costume, and he'd go out there and get on stage and stump for war bonds, just like they did in the movie. That really happened.
And it just had great scenes throughout the film. The Red Skull, you get the classic Cap villain right off the jump, and they did such a good job
well.
of having those two collide.
God, it was just great.
I think the strength of this movie for me, and again, we talk about on this list a lot, the personal journey. I think it's the best relationship they've had between the lead and the female lead in the movie, with Cap and Peggy Carter in this movie. And it's why I think it stuck around and ultimately became his ending in Endgame, was how much you connected as a viewer with those two. And that's a huge credit to both Chris Evans playing Captain America, and then I think it's Haley Atwell who played Peggy Carter. She
and
did
it just set
such a
the
good
stage, for his character. That was the love of his life. And you kind of fell in love with them as they were falling in love. Like, what could have been when you get to Endgame.
Yep.
Even though I hated to see it, you kind of you kind of see how
at least you get Steve kind of gets that closure, and this movie
Yeah.
kind of starts that. And then even there's smaller stuff like whenever we watch this, I'm like, man, I forget Bucky dying in the movie, falling off the train, and how much that hits hard. And you just get some. I think this was also the great mix of Marvel using CGI, but a lot of practical stuff too. Where you can tell are some
real
sets
stunts.
there. There are some real stunts. There is, and you feel that in the performances of it, as opposed to some of the stuff that's lower on the list. That's guys on a green screen wearing green dots, and this movie just really captured that incredibly well.
I know a lot of Marvel hounds will probably put this movie way back there, but for me and Reed,
it's a great movie,
right up there.
And it's
it
one.
Really does.
I'll be honest, it's become my 4th of July tradition that I watch this movie every year on the 4th of July. It's just such a great film and captures it. So, top 2.
Coming in at number 2.
Again, we debated on all these 2 and 1. After we kind of got down the list, we bounced these 2 back and forth.
And
probably
you may
10
have
times.
Any one of these 8 you may have as your top one, and you could make an argument for it because they're all so good, and there are probably some even in part 3
that you could lift up and say are legitimately in your top 5 or top 3.
Right.
2, we had Spider-Man No Way Home. It's the only entry of Phase 4 that makes it on the top half of the list.
Yeah.
But it just shows the strength of the movie. And as a comic book fan, as a comic book movie fan,
and how they pulled it together,
and how they actually got this to work.
I don't know.
To see the 3 Spider-Men brought together in a movie.
And think about it, when you were in the theater watching this movie and you got to see all the Spider-Mans together, I mean, every time one of them came on screen, like the audience went, "Oh!"
It just erupted.
Yeah, even though they knew it was coming.
You knew it was coming going into the movie, but you were still just stunned that it happened.
The joy
that was there. I also loved that even though they brought back Maguire and Garfield, they didn't bury Tom Holland. It was still very much his movie and his character arc.
Yeah.
Seeing the old villains too. I mean, you get all of them back. You get Molina and Defoe and those guys.
How did they get those guys back to do this?
And it was just so cool to see, they were so great back 15 years ago, and then they come back and it's like, man, they haven't skipped a beat. They're still as well cast as before.
Molina did great as Doc Ock, in that scene when they're in the apartment and he's just talking him through it, Oh my gosh, it was great.
It just universally worked. And then I love that there was the differences between the Spider-Man, like them calling out that Maguire doesn't have the organic web, he has the organic ones. He doesn't have to build his web. Oh my God,
it was hilarious.
Building that humor. And
how does that work?
Andrew Garfield really shined in this movie too. And that was, I think, for me as somebody who really loved the Amazing Spider-Man movies and always felt he never got a fair shake, it was so cool to see him get that. And the movie moment that stands out for me is when they let him catch MJ, because they did so well of that moment with Gwen and his movies haunting him, and he finally gets that shot at redemption.
So now
Doctor Strange is in there too. I mean, also really well done, and the ending really hits home that he's finally the Spider-Man. The whole world's forgotten him. He's given up his relationships. It packs an emotional punch. It's funny. It's just a great movie, and hard to believe, but does not make it to number 1.
So
number 1,
you're probably thinking, okay, they went through this one, they went through that one.
What's left?
What's left for number 1? This is probably going to be a shocker for some of you.
And it's got to be the guy on the top of the stack, and that's the original Iron Man movie.
The one that started it all.
And part of me would say, okay, we're just being nostalgic with it. But in all honesty, I think if you go back and you actually watch these movies, it's not
the
a
Mark
movie
I
that's been
suit
top.
at the beginning.
It is, in all honesty, probably the greatest origin story comic book movie we've had.
It just, the way he's working there in the cave and he puts the Mark I suit together and the audience erupted when he came out in that clunky suit and he's throwing fire and little rockets.
When it was the first time you really felt like a comic book movie understood its origins. It balanced that fun while being serious, while striking the right emotional tone.
The effects were great. The
effects
CGI
were
was good. Even for way back then, they were strong.
Well, you had practical effects. And again, one of the coolest things for any movie, and what I always look for is, the beat-em-up action scenes are always going to be there in an action movie. Can you deliver a character arc? Can you make us care? And in that movie, what they take Tony Stark through from the start to the finish, as a character, it's just so cool to see. And I think Downey Jr., this was one of probably the most surprising performance ever. Because remember where he was kind of a broken, washed-up actor.
Yeah.
He
and
gets
now he's
this
going to be in
break.
a superhero movie. Like,
And
what's going to happen?
Iron
this
Man.
This upstart Marvel Studios.
Well, Iron Man had always been, if you were a comic book fan, he was relevant, but he was never Batman or Superman or Spider-Man or even the X-Men. Iron Man was kind of a B-list character, and this just propelled him to the next level, and it was just so great to see.
At that
all
point,
the variations of the suits and all that.
Marvel had sold off all of their hot properties, and yet they were going to try and start their own studio. And so then they're digging through in the barrel. Who do we got left? We got Thor.
You got the Avengers characters, basically.
You got Hulk. Well, a couple of people have tried Hulk. He really didn't go over well.
Yep.
Who do we got left? They're kind of working down the list, and the mainstream public may never have even heard of Iron Man.
Yeah.
I mean, I bought Iron Man comics.
Yeah, it's the difference.
He
of
wasn't
like
my favorite Marvel
fan
character.
And I'd say even most comic book fans. Like, in all honesty, yes, there's some hardcore Iron Man fans. But
he wasn't my favorite. I mean, I was reading Captain America and the Falcon.
He was kind of a cool character that if he showed up in a book you were buying, that's cool.
Like the Avengers. I often bought the Avengers back then. And, but they just brought it.
And I'm always amazed that they started with that, because it's honestly like if DC would start, and it's like, because they didn't have Spider-Man or the X-Men or Daredevil, and it's like if DC started, and it's like, well, you don't have Batman and you don't have Superman. It's like, start with a Green Arrow movie, and like they make it work, right?
Yeah, I mean, that is just amazing all on its own.
It's so great, and then again, just the thing that carries it home at the end of the day. It's not really nostalgia. It's the acting. It's the performances. It's the character arc. It's the perfect set design. It's that mix of CGI and practical effects.
Action scenes.
And it's just memorable. That first time he pulls down in the full red and gold armor like it's seen here, and wipes out that village of terrorists. It's one of the coolest scenes in any comic book movie. And it's the perfect thing of less is more sometimes. You don't get like 45 minutes in the Iron Man suit in this movie. But the scenes that it gets, it hits really well. And Mike mentioned it earlier. I think, where this movie goes up, every comic book movie prior to this had been built on the secret identity. The Clark Kent, but he's also Superman. Yeah. Bruce Wayne, but he's also Batman. Peter Parker, but he's got to hide. And then this movie just ends with like the mic drop of like, no, I am Iron Man.
The trick ending.
It lets you know you were in for something different.
Yeah.
And again, they also kicked off another movie tradition, the end credit scene. I had heard like, hey, stick around afterwards. I'm like, man, am I really going to sit through like 6 minutes of this black screen rolling through a bunch of thousands of names, and then you show up and bam, there's Nick Fury, and he's talking about the Avengers, and you're like, oh my gosh, this might actually happen. It's just great.
The forethought and the guts to like put that as their first movie, and then to pull it off so well.
Yep.
To cast it so well.
Especially because the casting wasn't easy. I mean, it's crazy to think now because of how popular he is.
And then when
Downey at the time was not an easy choice.
Like, Reed has seen all these movies several times, but in all honesty, most of these movies I only saw once or maybe twice. Mm-hmm. But Iron Man 1 is one that I bought on DVD, and me and Jackson probably watched it 15 times, 20 times, who knows.
Yeah.
But it's one that we could always go back to. And
definitely deserves its spot at top of the list.
And even though I'm a Captain America fan, even though I'm a Thor fan, I still put this movie at top billing. Yep. So what do you think?
That's our list. That is the top.
Did we surprise you?
Whatever you have with yours, feel free to put it down below. We'll let your thoughts know what we have. We'll do some more things about rankings and things, but it was really a lot of fun to go through the MCU. Hope you guys enjoyed that, and we will see you in some videos in the future.
Thanks for tuning in. Two guys,
stack of comics.
and a stack of comics. See you later.